G'day, I'm Mick, and this week I'm going to be breaking down Critical Role Season 2, Episode 2. Oh, I wasn't expecting that. Last time we approached the breakdown with the goal of dissecting how to prepare and run a first session like Mercer. Whereas for this polarizing session, much like the players, we'll be trying to piece together exactly what happened and break down how Mercer was trying to help the players progress through the mystery. Now, before diving into how the wheels fell off, whether you like the session or not, there's no question that it didn't go as intended. But that does raise the question of what was intended, especially if you're thinking of running a crime thriller of your own. What did Mercer do? It's a low-level mystery, a whodunit, and by the end of the session, they should have solved it. Perhaps even confront their main suspect who flees when cornered, turning nearby guards into zombies to cover his retreat, thereby allowing the option to extend the session with combat if the players were really quick to solve it. Then, with Molly being arrested, there would have to be an effort to secure his release, which would take up a fair chunk of time at the start of the session. But for the meat of the session, we have 3 clues, one of which Mercer will be hinting heavily at, and expecting to take up the biggest chunk of time. And when the players finally do start interviewing the carnies, it's clear there was going to be a lot of blame passed around, mysterious backstories to each and every one of them. The players would have to question them and finally piece it all together, judge who they trust and who they don't. But as often is the case in D&D, the best laid plans. So let's walk start to end through the session and get a better understanding of what happened. The previous episode ended with a threat that set up the arc for this episode in advance: solve the mystery or take the fall. The players had several leads established for them: the carnival NPCs, the victim, and a crime scene. They had a week to think about things, and Mercer had learned their version of events, that the initial victim's age possibly played some part in things. So taking that knowledge, this session begins, as most do, with a recap from Mercer. It's 300 words that restates the location and general flow of events, and it's its best chance to guide the player's interpretation of what transpired, all the while bringing the viewers up to speed. As he zooms in on the players, he glosses over most of the details until we approach the zombie attack. Mercer explains that during a musical performance by this young dwarven girl whose voice was this mysterious, magical, enchanting experience, a member of the audience rose up and began to transform. He makes no mention of the transforming man's old age, nor that he's even a man. He's flagging that information, their initial theory, as unimportant. But Toya, this young dwarven girl with her clear bardic talent, warranted an exhaustive description. This is his first effort to push the players away from the victim and towards the carnival. The recap comes to a close, and instead of immediately launching into the current session, he pauses. So, this pause affords the players an opportunity to ask or express anything they'd been holding on to a week before Mercer kicks things into gear, and so they're able to clarify their positions and get an NPC name they'd missed. With that moment over, the session starts with an action. A guard comes running in, 3 carnies, including Molly, are put in shackles and escorted out by 5 guards, as Watchmaster Joe Seed gives direction to his men, but also the players. The rest of you, keep an eye on the performers here. Ask around, see what you can find. Being sure to make eye contact with each and every player. This is his second nudge, telling the players to focus on one of their 3 leads in particular. But before the sleuthing can begin, a player character has been arrested, and no one wants Taliesin to have to sit out for a huge chunk of the session. So Mercer clearly establishes his prepared alternative to the obvious but doomed jailbreak scenario. Go to the stockade and appeal to the lawmaster. Marisha asks to head off and find Toya, an immediate split from the party, and Mercer isn't expecting this. He says, you may if you want to, but then immediately turns to the other party members, trying to clarify what everyone else is doing so as to not fragment the party further and hopefully give Marisha time to rethink setting out alone. A split game is a slower game, and mysteries are already pretty slow. The party decides to split into 4 technically. Travis and Laura follow the Watchmaster and his Crown's Guard as they leave with Molly. Liam and Sam follow them, lagging further behind, and then Marisha goes in the other direction to find Toya. Now, when running a split party, your goal is to reunite everyone at the same point in time as quickly as you can. Everyone but Marisha has a clear destination just a few minutes away, so Mercer takes care of her escapade first, and then hopefully will be able to redirect her back towards the others. And so his initial description of the area is really a tool to serve that purpose. He tries to communicate that Toya is in no immediate danger and there's no reason to go after her yet. All that's happening is the carnies being guided to their common area around a campfire. The guards just want to know where everyone is. No big deal. Rejoin the group. But for whatever reason that I don't think is ever explained, Marisha is set on freeing Toya, and this gentle ushering will have no effect if a player has something locked in their mind. She rolls stealth, and as she hides, even this simple description has an action to make it interesting. A horse nearby crunches its teeth. She glances about for anything lurking in the shadows, and with a 21 notices Toya being let out of the tent. There's a heavy thud sound as a large, obese lizard man lumbers forward and puffs its chest up at the Crown's Guard. Again, description dripping in action. A good rule of thumb is the more adjectives a character has, the more important they are, but what's more interesting here is Mercer always seems to struggle when describing Cowrie, even when asked directly. It's not unintentional. He's trying to convey that while the characters can rationalize Cowrie to be a lizard man, there's something off here, and at the very least, someone should ask him what he is. An animal check is then required to send a horse bolting, wheels clattering, and one guard takes off after it, leaving 3 behind to watch over the carnies. Marisha misunderstands this situation and approaches Cowrie, who once again is not described as a lizard man, but the devil toad that gives a deep, guttural growl. Now, when a player misunderstands a scene, they'll often do something that would otherwise seem ridiculous, and when they realize their mistake, they may push you as the DM to retcon it. But here we can see Mercer doesn't backpedal, he plays it straight and sticks to his guns. The guards recognize her and take out their manacles. As she's been arrested, Marisha explains in detail her intended method of escape, a barrage of information. I grabbed this guy, I elbowed that guy. With all that thrown at you, it can be overwhelming to know just what role to ask for. So Mercer breaks it down into parts. She wants to attack, but she's shackled, and we need to know if she can even move to break out of the shackles. That's strength and athletics check. And to give context as to why Marisha's description was so theatrical, while previously the players had just rolled an attack and Mercer described them, this campaign he's been urging the players to add their own creative commentary to their actions, and then he'll take over wherever they leave off. Marisha is clearly confused as to why Toya isn't running from the guards, and so Mercer gives a half answer of, honestly, the devil toad and her seem pretty close. He's grabbing her in a protective manner. Again, pushing the group's focus onto Cowrie. We can safely assume that Marisha will be led to catch up with the others, so we cut to Molly and his fellow carny NPCs who immediately speculate. You think this is someone on the inside or someone trying to sabotage us? This is a nice juxtaposition you often see in movies when someone wonders aloud who the bad guy could possibly be, and then the camera hard cuts straight to the yet to be revealed bad guy. After passing through the locks and hills wards, reinforcing the basic layout of the town, we reach the stockade, which doesn't abide by the 5 descriptor rule at all. Large, single-story, rectangular stone and masonry built for function, defensible, not very beautiful, well-made, sporting Crown's Guard banners, housing 2 men permanently on watch inside watching the front door. Dizzyingly lengthy description, which helps sell the central kernel Mercer's hitting at here. You're not breaking out of here at level 2, so choose your words carefully. The players are led into an office described as relatively simple, functional, a few crates of materials, evidence and papers. A stone desk is at the far end, where stands a messenger dressed for travel as a tough-looking dwarven woman rapidly scribbles on parchment. This momentary set pieces to remind the players that there is more going on. The world is bigger than their concerns. Mercer continues his description of the Lawmaster, tough-looking, middle years, silver-streaked black hair tumbling past her red and grey leather armour. She hands her parchment to the messenger, who exits past the players, physically drawing their mind's eye away from her, amplifying what will come next. A slam as her hand hits the table. Her pre-written monologue begins. Alright, what sort of riff-raff have you brought into me this day? Mercer has chosen her words, her tone, her actions, even the set dressing purposefully, so there's no confusing who this character is. She holds the power, she's gonna get things done, and she's not about to be pushed around. But she's also overworked and fed up with liars and criminals in general. She would just as quickly hang the players as have them walk free, whatever causes her and her town less trouble. Mercer has the NPCs who escorted the players leave the room to minimize the amount of cross-talking he has to do. He already has the Lawmaster, Gustav and Bo to deal with. And as Mercer knew the session would start this way, he was able to pre-write their entire exchange, allowing Taliesin a get-out-of-jail-free card with a single persuasion check. Considering what we see happen to Marisha, chances are if Taliesin failed, he would have still been let out just on a house arrest. It's no fun for a player to spend an entire session in a cell unless you're running a jailbreak session, and that's not what this is supposed to be. As they leave, Travis asks Taliesin about the large toad, clearly suspecting something's off, and Mercer now knows the party's on the right track. However, Taliesin's response is dismissive, so Mercer distracts with Bo's approach. After all, enough time has passed, it's dramatically appropriate, but mostly we just don't want the players to ignore their best lead. As with Taliesin, Mercer doesn't want a player in jail the whole game, but there must be consequences to their actions, especially attacking a guard. So Travis and Laura accompany Marisha down into the cells, where they meet a prepared NPC in the form of the jailer. After all, Bo and Gustav are being held here, and Mercer is expecting the players to question them, which would demand meeting the jailer. Travis Travis defends the circumstances of Mauritius' arrest, despite his character having no knowledge of those details. But Mercer overlooks this small piece of metagaming. It doesn't really matter, and it just expedites her release at the cost of the three's freedom to leave the tavern, and with that he accelerates everyone back to the nestled nook. For the next hour, the players interact with each other in the tavern, and Mercer is on hand when required to manage roles, answer questions, and have the locals react to their more exuberant maneuvers, and I'll mention some of the more interesting examples, but primarily for this session he's gauging their theories. What will they do next? Where are they thinking of going? And so far, for the most part, things are looking good. During their time here, Taliesin asks for a beer list, and Mercer cheekily avoids having to come up with a multitude of names simply by having the barmaid name her preferred one. There's also a moment where they all fall out of character, but it's still early on and they're not obviously off track yet, just schmoozing and getting to know each other, so Mercer trusts them to come back down without interjecting. At one point, Laura tries to cast Cure Wounds despite not having any slots left, and rather than simply saying, "No, you have no slots," Mercer allows it with a medicine check. To Jester, the wound appears far worse, swelling, bursting with pus. A prank from her trickster god, the Traveller, but Laura doesn't immediately understand that's what's happened. Mercer catches her confused expression, and instead of dryly explaining what he was trying to do, he adds another small detail, a distant laugh, trusting that's all she needs to piece it all together, which she does. They take a long rest, and when they awake, Mercer simply states, "The day is yours." But Sam makes a mistake with D&D Beyond, and everyone falls out of character again. So this time, Mercer does interject, re-describing their awakening, focusing on the smallest details, frost forming in their window, until he knows he has everyone's attention, and then he restates, "The day is yours. What do you wish to do?" And after almost 15 minutes of strategizing an exit from the inn due to the house arrest situation, Mercer interjects again. "In what order are you leaving?" Pushing them to exit. He doesn't describe each of their exits in detail, instead calmly accelerating the players to come together somewhere they'll be less concerned with stealth, a few blocks down out of sight of the Crown's Guard. This is a clear effort on Mercer's part to quell the party's caution and speed them up a little. It's approaching 2 hours in, so they should start heading to the carnival. And right on cue, Laura asks, "To the carnival?" And from all signs thus far, that was their intended direction, but then Taliesin counters, "Who was he?" And for the first time, their immediate direction becomes unclear. Mercer starts rearranging his notes as the players back and forth on where to go when they decide on a marketplace, something he hasn't prepared. But the players are curious about the victim, and that's fair. A single investigation check and they'll have everything they need to know and can move on to the carnival. So Mercer reads off what little he had written the week before about the old man. Enon Bringay, a human in his 80s, healthy, retired, but makes a bit on the side helping fishermen unload their boats. He's not particularly well known, but the mention of helping fishermen catches the party's attention, one group having fought a giant snake that came from the lake in their session 0. There's really no connection, why would there be, between a snake and a zombie? And when writing this sentence-long backstory for Enon, it would have never crossed Mercer's mind that the players would somehow see a connection there. It was a throwaway line, a bit of colour, but that's how these things often go. The players ask where Enon hung around, and Mercer throws them an improvised bone, flicking through his town notes, the old Mudhole Tavern, a location wherein he's prepared an NPC with information helpful for Liam's personal quest, should they ever seek a tavern while in trust involved. There's a lesson there. If the players are going off track, they may as well get something else out of it, and he can improvise another NPC there to make it clear that investigating the victim is a dead end and then redirect them back towards the carnival. When describing the tavern, Mercer relies on the player's life experience to expedite the process. They've all been to bars, so by saying a dark dive of a bar, they can paint most of the picture immediately. Then by focusing on one sense, the heavy scent of old wet wood, ale stain, and peanut, he personalizes the scene. There are only 2 people inside. Mercer clearly wants this over with quickly. He notes the sole patron is playing solitaire. This trope should flag to the players immediately that this is Enon's friend, as no character in any film, game, or book ever plays solitaire unless their usual opponent died in the previous act of the narrative. The other man, the bartender, is outwardly awkward from his shuffling movements to his stuttery manner of speaking, clearly more interested in his book than in his patrons, a quirk practically begging to be brought up in conversation. The players dance around some surface level questions regarding Enon and learn nothing of substance they didn't already know. They look lost. The victim seems a dead end. Remember, they only came here because they perceived some connection with the lake, and they haven't even asked about that. Wanting to get that out of the way, Mercer has the bartender spontaneously blurt something out to try and erase that connection and get them back on the right track. Shouldn't be doing that much manual labor at that age. And in the conversation that follows, he clarifies Enon wasn't just at the lake, he was in the North Ward too, just anywhere that offered the odd labour job he could handle. He's making it as clear as he can without right saying it that the lake is not the lead to follow, but the players don't catch on and continue with a barrage of questions. Any family nearby? No. Did he work for the breweries? No. Anyone at the docks to ask for? No. These questions just keep coming, so Mercer actively puts a stop to it by segueing into a conversation that will provide the one piece of information that NPC does have to offer: Liam's desired bookstore. As a side note, you'll catch that Mercer didn't have a name prepared for the book the bartender was reading, and to give himself more time to improvise one, he just kept talking. Looking at the cover, it's in another language which you can read, but the title, its translation, would come about to the rosed embrace. See, not even for Mercer is everything going to be instant. Now, usually when running a mystery, after befriending someone, you'll be able to get more useful information out of them, but strangely the party doesn't ask any follow-up questions after this moment of bonding, which isn't to say the bartender would have had anything more useful, but he may have been more candid and said that he didn't trust the carnival being in town, another nudge in the right direction. But instead, that line is given to the solitaire player with whom Taliesin speaks, and because the bartender's conversation fizzled out, Mercer actively asserts control of this conversation once the questioning begins, slapping down cards to keep momentum. This conversation will be coming to a close quickly, and the cards are the countdown. The man is abrasive and proudly racist, a trait not uncommon in most fantasy worlds, and an effective one to close a conversation and keep it that way. But unfortunately, this inspires yet another unintended connection we're about to learn in the minds of the players. We're 2 hours in as they leave the tavern. Ideally, that means an hour to go. That'd be a tight fit to get through all the carnies. Mercer now knows this will definitely run over time. He's again watching carefully to see who they will go to first so he can grab the right character notes and start the mystery. After all, in his mind, the victim is clearly established as a dead end, and he's distanced the connection with the lake. It's time to go to the carnival. But then Marisha shares her theories, primarily assisted by Taliesin, prime target for perfect victim, perfect candidate. No one really paid attention for him. He was old, had no family, and his son's gone. It's awfully convenient, a good candidate if you're trying to frame someone. And there are a lot of bigoted people around here, and the guards, they're really weird. They're everywhere. They're the one connecting through line. And the lawmaster didn't want the carnies here in the first place. If you're up to no good and don't want to get caught, blame it on the weirdos. Now, there's a whole conversation to be had about whether or not it's okay to try and read your dungeon master's expression. It's metagaming, no question. But at this point, they careen so wildly off track that Mercer's usual poker face is replaced by a myriad of baffled expressions and twitches. In a way, they should be commended for not allowing it to influence them. So many new theories are thrown into the pit with no evidence to support them that the players are just left overwhelmed and forget their initial leads. They forget what they've just learned. It's all too much to take in. So they do the most logical thing they can in that position. They take a step back. What were they doing? They were trying to learn about this lake connection of the victims. And so they decide to head to the lakeside docks. And with that, Mercer calls the break. Ideally, everyone will be able to take a moment to clear their heads, decompress a little, take a step back, and get things back on track when they return. If this were my game, during the break, the players would still be discussing it, and I'd ask them questions in smaller groups or even individually to gauge where they're at, and possibly urge those with a clearer grasp who aren't speaking up to share their thoughts with the others. A constant bump in their attempts to journey to the carnival has been Molly. He doesn't consider for a second that the carnies are responsible, so he repeatedly speaks out against going to the carnival. And because Taliesin is the most experienced role player of the bunch and throws himself so wholeheartedly into his characters even when he's not in the scene, the others often mistake Molly's conviction to be Taliesin's judgment and unknowingly give the character's word more weight than they realistically would without even realizing that's what's happening. So coming back from the break, the players head towards the docks but don't really have a destination in mind. And when they try to remember who they'd met there, Mercer interjects, informing them that they remember the location they battled the snake in their session 0. He's trying to usher them forward to a place that they can definitively sever any connection between the zombie and the snake, and therefore the victim and the lake. He constructs the location's improvised description based around the aftermath of that session 0 encounter. The building had flooded and it's only been a day or two. Floods are a slow cleanup. They'd still be dragging out the ruined furniture, and that's exactly what they find. In addition to the giant snake body, which is reasonable, it would take time to dismember, but really, mechanically, it's here as evidence the players could examine and realize there's nothing unnatural or suspicious about it. Just a big snake from the lake. And even when improvising like this, Mercer uses an action to sell the scene, a young boy's skinning, carving into the snake. The players are disguised when they approach, and Mercer forgets, having the man greet them as old friends, a common enough mistake for DM to make, and instead of trying to rationalize it or explain it away when Laura points it out, he laughs, admits his mistake, and thanks her for reminding him. It's not a big deal, and you can see there's no reason to be embarrassed if you forget something at your own table. He just starts over with the correct information, and everyone gets a good laugh out of it. Of course, when quizzed quizzing the fisherman, Mercer provides no new threads about the victim. Instead, twice he further distances the connection with the lake. Enon hasn't been at the docks for at least a week, and the snakes are natural inhabitants of the lake. Their attacks are a known, albeit uncommon occurrence. But what is weird, he says, is a carnival is in town. When Laura tries to quiz the improvised snake skinning kid, Mercer has to turn that throwaway line into a character on the spot. You'll note much of that kid's description and demeanour is informed by his reason for being there. He's gutting the snake, okay, he's young, so he's probably inexperienced at snake skinning considering how rare they are. Why is he skinning it? Well, the fisherman would need an extra hand, he'd probably first ask his neighbours. But why did this kid agree? The only payment is probably meat, so this was the hungriest of the neighbourhood kids. Maybe his fisherman parents haven't had many bites recently, so he's scrawny. Of course, this random NPC has no new information other than a fascination with the carnival. By this point, the players are getting visibly tired and decide that the characters on house arrest should probably return to the nestled nook before any guards come looking for them. Mercer doesn't weigh in either way. It's not the carnival, but it's an improvement over the lake, and given the chance to regroup in character, they may find their footing. So he rushes them into the inn, skipping the usual extended explanation and stealth check. You wait for a moment where nobody's watching and climb up and get to your rooms. He wants them in and out. He doesn't want them to waste any more time with travel. Meanwhile, Liam and Sam's characters go looking for people doing manual labour odd jobs the same way Enon was described. And Mercer uses this opportunity to guide them away from the docks to the northward, to once more distance the link with the lake. When they find nothing, Liam takes this opportunity to check out his bookstore, and Mercer runs with it. Again, if you're going off track, may as well make something out of it, and this may be just the distraction, the breath of fresh air necessary for everyone to regain their focus. The bookstore is described as a closet affixed to another building made of driftwood, basically a glorified storage shed, with windows blocked by cloth and piles of books inside. Upon entering, it's a veritable monsoon of knickknacks, declaring the owner a hoarder of all manner of curiosity. And in addition to being a memorable environment with an eccentric puff-head shopkeep, this is a store that requires very little prep for Mercer to run. He doesn't need a huge list of its contents, just a handful of items that can be found with varying levels of investigation. That said, the items found could have just as easily been improvised. Finding a book penned in a language you don't understand yet it calls to you magically is a classic piece of improvised loot. The other, Fiends of Folklore, is a last-ditch effort to push the party towards Cowrie sooner rather than later. And so Mercer makes this book significantly cheaper. Knowing the coin the players carry, he knows they can afford it, but Liam doesn't take the bait. Sam does manage to swipe some items, creating a spot of brevity in what was otherwise a very slow hour, and Mercer cuts straight back to the tavern as soon as they leave the shop, hoping to find the others reinvigorated and ready to go. Mercer has the Crown's guards knock on the player's door and very clearly droll. You will not be needed today. We'll be back tomorrow. They are dismissive, tired. There's no mistaking they don't care at all about their babysitting duty. Mercer is making it abundantly clear these guards aren't being paid to care and they're not going to be hard to deceive. You're free to run around, short of tripping and losing a shoe in front of them. Don't worry, get back out there and check out the carnival. As Liam and Sam rejoin the party, the energy in the room is low, but as far as Mercer sees it, there's a clear goal for them and they had it in mind for the first hour and 40 minutes. They just need to go back to that and everything will be fine. And Marisha tries to make that point that they have made progress by eliminating a potential lead, but they're all tired and she fumbles her wording, so they fall out of character for a moment and misunderstand her point. When they settle back in, she restates her theory from earlier. No one knew anything about the victim. He's a prime candidate for someone's little experiment. It's a small town. It's strange there's no gossip. Someone is talking about this. We just haven't found them yet. Sam adds to this that he saw some cloaked figures in his session 0 late at night. Maybe that's important. Despite all Mercer's efforts to make their best move as clear as possible, the players are still confusing themselves, and when the crazier ideas are thrown forward, no one has anything left in the tank to reasonably disagree. It takes 10 minutes for them to finally leave the tavern again, deciding it's necessary to try and MacGyver an alarm in case someone sneaks into their room at 2 in the morning. Mercer speeds them outside and takes a moment to describe various lanterns and the faintest bit of moonlight with broken clouds. He's trying to telegraph that it should be easy enough for them to move quickly without being noticed. Yes, he'll throw in a stealth check or two, but it's not going to lead to anything. The last thing he wants to do is slow them down. So he asks them all calmly, "Where are you going?" And still utterly confused, they decide to check on the location Sam saw the cloaked figures. They may as well be throwing darts at random ideas at this point, but that's not a problem. Just like with the lake idea, Mercer can let it run its course, make it clear that it's a dead end, and then let them pick a new direction. So in no time at all, they arrive and find nothing. Mercer, still not willing to give them too obvious a hint, takes a breath and tries to get them to start over. So about 3 in the morning in the center of the city by yourself. What do you wish to do? Very clearly, calmly, telling them they can go anywhere, do anything, just start from the top. What do you wish to do? But they're tapped. Now, as I said earlier, Molly is convinced it's not the carnival, and that's coming off as Talison's position as well, but if anyone has been picking up what Mercer's putting down, it's Talison, the most experienced role player there. So he effectively asked for what amounts to a meta-intelligence check to give Molly the insight that Talison himself already has. He asked to meditate on the situation, see if he feels anything, because currently everyone is lost and it's been almost 3 hours. Mercer shakes his head at this, then seems to resign himself over to it. He clearly wanted the players to get on track without being spoon-fed. It's silly that they got stuck before step 1, and it was no fault of his own. This sort of thing happens, even to Mercer. But he concedes and allows Talison an intelligence check. Poring over the details of what's transpired and what you guys have done so far to find information, there are still things to inquire about, still things to wonder and discover, and there's been a few places you haven't been to, a few places you haven't returned to, a few people you haven't even inquired about that might be closer to the investigation. Everyone catches on at this, and Talison, without skipping a beat, acknowledges maybe we have to go back to the circus. So now they're finally headed in the right direction, Mercer can ramp up the danger and the realism again, and appropriately they bump into some Crown's guards. Liam sends them on their way with a natural 20 deception, but really it would have been harder to fail that encounter than not. Mercer knows there's no way they're going to fit combat in this session as well. All he wanted was the threat of combat to act as a nice counterpoint before the Carney interrogations, to try and inject some energy back into the table. When they reach the carnival, Mercer introduces the guards with a yawn, reinforcing that it shouldn't be a problem to sneak past them back and forth, just keep pressing forward. Travis and Liam, in the guise of Crown's guards, bluff their way into the main tent to distract the guards and examine the crime scene. Mercer indicates there are crumpled notes on the ground. These most likely would have given an insight into what the investigator or maybe the pathologist was thinking of the crime scene, but they're ignored and we never find out. The other four sneak around the back to investigate where the Carneys are staying. Mercer indicates one guard is nodding off and the other is doing a predictable patrol, again almost over-telegraphing to the players that they should have no problem sneaking around. In something of a hurry, Mercer describes the 4 tents back here primarily by size, and this ends up causing some confusion further down the line. Initially he says 4 main tents, 2 very large, one of which contains Toya and Cowrie, the Devil Toad. That's on the south side. The north largest tent contains the Knot Sisters and Orna. The very, very small south tent usually houses Bo, and the other, therefore medium north tent would have Desmond. But with no relative mention of the Grand Performance tent, nor an ordered layout, the players fail to create a clear map of what's what in their mind. Again, this comes down to everyone's exhaustion at this point. A physical map wouldn't normally be necessary for such a simple scene, but it would have cleared up the confusion. Even an impromptu scribble of boxes around a campfire on a spare piece of paper in your own games. But even now, within inches of their best leads, the players stall and keep brainstorming scenarios Mercer never concocted or even considered to include as red herrings. Mauritia suggests that the location of the circus near the lake is somehow key, and Laura follows up with the idea of it being cursed land. But they're so close now, Mercer isn't about to give them another push. They're literally right there, and once more it's Talison who kicks the party in the right direction and goes looking for the Carneys, whistling to grab their attention. He's been very kind to his DM here, allowing Mercer to decide who responds and therefore who will be spoken to first. And so what was intended as the meat of the session, the pre-written talking points and opinions of each Carney, begins with Desmond. And while Mercer does try to retain some of that mystery he'd hoped for, is it Gustav, is it Orna, or one of the performers, he's very aware of the time and he tries to fast forward through it. The information that, had they arrived earlier, would have taken more back and forth, just naturally bubbles to the surface. In talking to Desmond, he seems melancholy, but his direct manner of speaking and his concern for the party and the other Carneys puts the players on his side. He speaks well of Gustav, a good man that makes poor choices. So by starting here, showcasing a sympathetic, relatable figure in Desmond, ideally the players align their initial views with him and are going to be less likely to suspect Gustav despite what they'll hear later from the other Carneys. But the players aren't in the headspace for solving a mystery anymore at this point. The eager questions and focus they had at the start of the session are long gone. They're at best flat and at worst restless. Midway through the conversation, Laura casts Detect Good and Evil as a Hail Mary, feeling that the questions are leading nowhere, and they all head out into the next tent over where they find Orna and the Knot Sisters, who are kind enough to question their own theories as soon as they give them, Mercer's way of dissuading the players from extending them any real credibility. But this This wasn't the tent Laura thought she was heading for. She wanted to investigate the crime scene with her detect evil spell, but because of the confusion that arose from labeling tents purely by size, Mercer repeatedly walks her to the wrong tent. But also, Mercer knows that the detect evil spell is one of the few things that can instantly end the investigation. As soon as they detect Carrie's a fiend, any layman in that world would know fiends, aka demons and devils, are unquestionably evil. So perhaps it was an intentional misstep on his part 3.5 hours in to walk Laura past Carrie's tent and ping her demon radar. However, Laura and Sam don't immediately conclude that the detected fiend must be the culprit, offering maybe he's a good fiend. And whether or not that's a reasonable thing for their characters to consider, Mercer decides against correcting that assumption. He knows that as soon as it's mentioned to Taliesin or another NPC, the truth will come out. And that will be a more rewarding reveal than being informed now in a whisper. It's just a matter of time. So now with the mystery as good as solved, from here on out, Mercer is freely able to add colour and complication to each of the major characters without having to worry about pushing the players in the right direction. The duo decide to chat with Toya, currently cradled in Kaori's arms. His skin squeaks as it folds over itself. They're too tired to ask any heavy-hitting questions, and all they really learn is that her voice is clearly damaged somehow and don't know what to make of it. And with this newly found freedom to run wild with tangents, Mercer even touches on Talison's backstory. He wasn't speaking when he first came to the carnival. But although Mercer knows the mystery is solved, the players are getting to the end of their rope and are seriously considering the conspiracy theories thrown around earlier, which don't sound that crazy given Desmond's unprompted defense of Gustav. So they ask if Gustav had any enemies, and for the sake of something to do, they literally run out of the tent brandishing the half answer of Orna. Mercer cuts back to those still with the Knot sisters, which seemed a strange decision to some of the viewers who thought he left Liam and Travis alone for too long. But they're running way over time. Everyone wants this solved, and the key to that is getting Sam and Laura to share what they found with the others. There's nothing to gain by switching to Liam and Travis right now. And while waiting for the two to return, Mercer is now free to more strongly characterize the Knot sisters and Orna the way he would have liked had the session unfolded as planned, throwing accusations around, forming clear layers of doubt and mystery that begged to be chiseled through. Sam and Laura return to accuse Orna, and the gimme that gotcha piece of information doesn't come up. Now, whether it was just the fact that the 4-hour mark was rapidly approaching, or that Mercer realised by not giving Laura and Sam any reason to think that being a fiend is unusual, they'd have no reason to bring up that information, he finally has an NPC lay out their honest opinion in an effort to directly focus the conversation on Kaori. Orna straight up points a finger at the toad, and that's all it takes for Laura to spill the beans, giving us a great payoff and the mystery is solved. Mercer needs to now quickly tie up the session and establish a direction for next week, so Travis and Liam are granted the honour of witnessing Kaori's escape, establishing the next session as a hunt, and ending the mystery session as initiative is about to be rolled against some zombies, promising a high energy, low risk start to the next session and perking everyone up in the last few minutes. Excitement has returned to the table. While plenty found this episode slow, even unwatchable in the middle, others really enjoyed the struggle, saying it felt like a real D&D mystery and reminded them of their own experiences. And it's definitely a positive message for new DMs that things can just as easily go sideways for Mercer. But as for the question of what went wrong, or rather the hordes of comments saying what they would have done better, what hints he should have given, hindsight is 20/20, and looking at the sequence of events as they unfolded, there's not much you can call him out on. The players seem to be on the right track. When the theory of age and illness being a factor is brought up, Taliesin and Laura give solid, perfectly reasonable explanations to ignore it. And it's not until an hour 40 in that they steer away from the carnival for the first time. At every wrong turn, Mercer identifies and removes the offending red herring, but the players just keep pulling new ones out of thin air. Their biggest issue was overthinking. They couldn't see the forest for the trees, or rather they couldn't see the trees for the forest. And that's the same problem you often run into with puzzles. Occam's razor is the first thing thrown out the window. So what can we learn from this? What should we take away? Well, we can take a look at what Mercer had prepared, and then how he adapted to the changing situation, and finally why the players kept missing the bait. The intended session had a few pre-written exchanges, the recap and the initial talk with the Watchmaster, the conversation between the Lawmaster and Gustav, and then each of the carnival NPCs had their own opinions and backstories fleshed out. The jailer may have needed bribing or appealing to so the players could access Gustav and Bo for their side of the stories, as it seems a lot of the suspicion would have landed on the Carnival Master himself. Combat with the two zombies at the end was expected, and a sentence or two about each of the victims were written. Finally, the Crown's Guard investigators have come to their own initial conclusion of what happened, and there were some notes left at the crime scene. But if we look at what wasn't expected, there's a marketplace, a second tavern, the snake house, and a bookstore. But it wasn't all improvised. Mercer never really lets them interact with the marketplace. He just tells them all the information they they would have discovered there in one hit. He created the tavern's name and bartender in his Trostenwald preparation for this exact sort of situation, and the Snake House had already been visited in a session 0. All he had to do was tweak them both to fit the time of arrival in the narrative. So there are only 2 NPCs that needed improvising, and you'll notice their personalities are a direct product of the circumstances that necessitated their creation. When improvising the solitaire player, Mercer needs someone to close off the Enon line of investigation and redirect the players towards the carnival. Who would know anything about Enon? Well, a friend. How can that be telegraphed to the players, though? He's lost someone to talk to, someone to drink with, someone to play cards with. But why didn't they both go to the carnival? Carnivals are strange after all, there's a fair amount of superstition around them, perhaps he feels strongly about that. As for coming up with a voice, he's probably the same age as Enon, so elderly. And if superstitious, he'll be wary of strangers, outsiders, anyone different from himself, especially if they're dressed like they're from the carnival that just killed his friend. And at the time Mercer is creating this character, the players are starting to fall behind the intended timeline, so make him irritable, rude even, so the players don't want to keep the conversation going. He'll say his piece, and that's it. As for why the players kept getting distracted, this came down to a few things. The threat of the guards, after all some of them weren't supposed to even leave the nestled nook, Molly's insistence of innocence, how late in the session the investigation actually started, and the repeated dead ends right off the bat. Beginning with the house arrest, this wasn't something Mercer wanted to corner them into, but there needed to be a consequence for attacking the guards, and a non-prison alternative in case Towson failed his persuasion check at the start of the game and wasn't granted complete freedom. When Mercer realizes this has become an issue, he does all he can to inform the players that the Crown's guards are not a huge threat to them. They're tired, uninterested, they just want the case over and done with as much as the players do. With hindsight, he may have gone with a different punishment. Perhaps a guard who did something to upset the lawmaster is assigned to personally babysit the party wherever they go as a makeshift punishment for the players and the guard alike. Molly's resolve, as I've spoken about, comes down to unintentional or subconscious metagaming. The other players tend to react to events their characters aren't present for and then share their ideas in player-to-player crosstalk, which means they have to make a conscious effort not to take that player knowledge with them into their characters. That's not a problem, it's just their way of enjoying the game and trying to piece everything together. Whereas Towson plays differently, sometimes catching himself about to wonder something aloud and stopping mid-sentence as he realizes his character isn't there or wouldn't think that. He tries to hide his player reactions and assumes the physical form of his character throughout the night even if he's not in the scene, hunched, flipping cards and side-eyeing everyone. He's a method actor. But because the rest of the players are so aligned in their group play style, it's been a common theme over the years that they take Talison's character's feelings as, oh, this is what Taliesin thinks, and if he's convinced, he must have a good reason, let's try something else first. It's not a conscious attempt to cheat or anything, it's just a side effect of when you have these different sort of play styles at the same table. And the only one who can really identify and do anything about that is Taliesin, which he did with his intelligence check around the 3rd hour. The late start wouldn't have been a problem had they gone straight towards one of the carnies, but there was no reason to push them forward at that point. They seemed to be ready to head down the right path, so nothing needed correcting. And everyone was having a blast. For a full hour they were in the tavern and Mercer said very little. It is, after all, the player's story, and that's exactly what they were building. If you as the DM can sit quietly and the player characters just back and forth for an hour, that's magic. Handling the dead end problem, however, is where Mercer is at a huge disadvantage compared to the rest of us. The first few leads the players investigate are all brick walls. Their initial enthusiasm and rapid fire of deep, hard-hitting questions yields nothing again and again, and so they eventually stop asking those questions. If it didn't work the previous 3 times, why keep beating a dead horse? But really they're just asking them of the wrong people in the wrong places, which means when they find the right people, their exchange is more of a, oh, hey, yeah, what do you think's happening? Mercer recognizes this is beginning to happen when he calls the break, but because it's a stream with a minimum time and a maximum break, in no time at all they have to continue, and the player's conditions just deteriorate from there on out. The best thing he could have done, and probably would have done if he were running that game at home, is take a much longer break, or even end the session there. Do something else, play a board game together, or paint some minis to decompress. The players are getting frustrated, and he was good enough to recognize it early. D&D is meant to be fun, and most of the players don't have much fun past that point. Given a week to re-energize and rethink the situation, they'd start on a much better foot than the one they're forced to drag through the rest of this stream. And Mercer would be able to deliver a much more layered, mysterious experience than the one he had to rapid fire out at the end of the night. So the best thing to take away from this love it or hate it episode is that things aren't going to always go the way you expect. But when they do go off the rails and you're forced to improvise, pause, take a moment, and construct a logical response that speaks to why they went off the rails in the first place. And always pay close attention to your players. If they start to seem frustrated or zone out, take a break, go for a walk. No one is forcing you all to play, and most people would rather play D&D for 2 hours and have a great time than twice that with no extra enjoyment. You're here to have fun, and if you're not having fun, something is wrong. Well, that was not the DM breakdown I was expecting you all to pick. It's clear there's a desire to see every Critical Role episode broken down in succession, but I think there's more to learn from some episodes than from others, and there are definitely other DMs out there that have a lot worth dissecting. So what I'm thinking, and I'll throw it open for you to all tell me how you feel, is I'll alternate between doing a full DM breakdown on a particularly interesting episode of any show, and then the next DM breakdown would catch up on each arc of the new Critical Role campaign, taking the most interesting, learnable moments from the most recent episodes and highlighting them. So let me know your thoughts on that and comment or tweet me with what you want to see in the next DM breakdown. I'll make a poll of the most interesting answers. As always, if you like what's on the channel, consider sharing this around to other DMs or subscribing. There's a new video every week. Last week explored my thoughts on starting with a module. Otherwise, thanks for stopping by, and until next time, I'll see you guys down under in the comments.